Welcome back, everybody, to tonight's edition of Modern Day Apocrypha. I am especially excited for tonight's episode because it's something that Nick and I talked about a lot in the inception of this podcast. And now that it's finally happening, I'm very excited that it's here. Nick, why don't you tell us a little more?
Yeah, so this one was actually our first user-submitted topic to cover. And it's really about privilege. I don't know if I'm unique to this, but I just feel like I don't really appreciate the things that I've got. And I'll say that this year, maybe I've started to more than any other year because you kind of have to look inward during the whole pandemic. But
Right.
like, damn, my life is good when you just compare to what the world has historically been. Like, it almost feels like there shouldn't be a single thing to be able to complain about when you just think about what today's world is compared to, say, like the 1200s or something like that.
Yeah, or even sooner than that. Like, not that long ago, humans didn't have grocery stores. You had a market, and you had to like go to wherever the market was. There wasn't just a grocery store around the corner. No, you had to go to the town where the market was. And it wasn't just, I'm coming home from the office and let me, no, you know what? I'm tired tonight. Let me just grab a pizza. Life was so different, you know?
Or hell, even like nowadays, you don't even have to go home from the office. It's like, hey, Amazon primed my stuff. It's going to get to my house before I get home.
Yep.
It's a beautiful world.
Yep. Electricity. Like, holy shit. I can't imagine. Like, I've been camping and stuff, right? But even then, I have my phone or my flashlights, and I've got electricity, and I bring my modern technology into my rugged experience. No, you'd have to have a fire and candles, and man, like just thinking about all of the extra steps you'd have to go to just sustain yourself. When we really think about that in comparison, all of the options and shit we have today.
Whew. Yeah, I think the big theme that I think we're going to talk about tonight is how this privilege, which is such a broad word, but this privilege of life that we get to live today really centers around the idea that we don't have to focus on survival anymore. Mm-hmm. And instead, we can focus on, the creative endeavors. We can have sports stars. I mean, you name it, we can do it because we don't have to be conscious of, am I going to not be able to eat because I wasn't working in the fields today?
Right. Yeah. I can't even imagine because obviously I only know my own reality and my own experience. But, I've done a bunch of different things career-wise, right? I did the music thing for a while. I did, a bunch of like retail jobs, that I'm in the corporate space now, all in one short part of a lifetime. Think about, a few hundred years ago, that wasn't an option. You grew up on a farm and you just did farm work because that's what you knew and were trained to do, and that's what you had access to. And you didn't even have the resources to get yourself to learn elsewhere. Or if you did, you literally said goodbye to your family forever and went and lived and became the family and an apprentice of a blacksmith or a tanner or whatever it was. Like, you really committed your life to whatever it was you were doing, and that was it. Oh, you know what? Having that, I've been doing this for a couple decades. I'm getting bored. Let me get a change of scenery. Like, that's so convenient. That's so privileged. I love that we have it. It's just, holy shit,
Yeah, it's a huge contrasting lifestyle. I kind of had this topic on my mind over the past few days because I knew it was coming up. Mm-hmm. And my girlfriend and I went up to Bowling Green, Kentucky and had a little date. And we were sitting in like the historic town square, right? It's, like a few 2- and 3-story buildings that look like they're easily from the early 1900s, maybe even earlier. And then, just like a little grassy kind of field in the middle with some fountains and stuff. And I was sitting there thinking like, wow, not that long ago, just a few decades ago, this was quote unquote downtown.
Yeah.
And it just kind of sunk in, and I'm sure it didn't really dawn on Sarah as much as it did for me, but like it was crazy to think about how everything, all the little stores you mentioned, like your blacksmith, your church, your candle store, your market, all of this was focused on like just a few acres and few, like, I don't know, 10 acres, and that's it. And I think that's because, you know, people didn't have cars. You can't just drive and have these sprawling cities, because back when you had to walk, or if you're wealthy, you had a horse, you couldn't just go all over the place. You had to go to like one centralized spot to get everything that you needed.
Yeah. It's so interesting to think through that. And like, it's dumb because I think the ignorance in me goes, oh yeah, I know what life on the prairie was like. I watched Little House on the Prairie with my mom growing up, you know?
Even read the book.
Like, oh yeah, I've got a good perspective, but no, you're watching it detached as entertainment, as like, oh, this is just foreign. Oh, what's fun about this? No, like, you got to wake up at the crack ass of dawn and go milk the cow and do all of this stuff to just sustain your own family household before you go off to school. Then you came home and you're doing all this stuff. And it's fun and entertaining because it's moving the story along, but you're not thinking about the real reality of that. And for a lot of us, I know for me, I lived, oh, you know, I did my 8 hours and now I'm going to come and screw around with my friends, or I'm going to play some video games, or I'm going to binge watch for the next 8 hours on Netflix. Even the ability to choose those things is so privileged, because we've evolved enough that 8 hours, at least for some of us, right? I know that's not everyone's reality, but at least for some of us, that's enough. It generates enough resources to cover all this other stuff in its excess.
Yeah, I'd be curious to kind of think more about what it is for the rest of the world. Like if you think about Bangladesh, and if you, I don't know what Bangladesh is particularly well known for, but I think they manufacture a lot of clothing. And some of those people who work in some of the factories there might be working for, I don't know, I'm just going to ballpark, let's say like 50 cents a day or $1 a day, and that's over 8 hours. And so it's interesting to think about the privilege that we have just because of where we live.
Yep.
We have the opportunity of jobs that are around us, and we can move because we've hit that threshold of having enough resources to be able to literally pack all our shit up, move it across the country, or move it to a whole nother country and find a place where there's even better jobs. Whereas if you haven't hit that, you know, critical mass point of wealth, you're really just kind of stuck and pigeonholed, or you're taking a massive, massive risk to go and chase that career.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's been several moments in my life where I feel like, for one reason or another, career or even just worldview, whatever, I felt like I was starting over. And I'm like, man, this is so hard. It's a privilege to be able to start over, you know? Which to me is kind of a wild perspective that I didn't even think about coming into this. Going, man, I've got the opportunity to just, you know what, fuck it, let me do something different. And sure, it's going to take some time to build and get some traction in that new direction. But even in like the corporate space, you and I have both jumped around to lots of different roles, and having the ability to do that, not go, yeah, I've been doing this same thing for the last 10 years and there's nothing else, you know? And I know that is the reality for a lot of people, that they're kind of stuck in a lane or stuck in a track, and it's still different than it was hundreds of years ago.
So what do you think the key changes here are?
What do you mean?
So what comes to my mind, you already mentioned electricity. I think that's enormous. If I think about like 3 major innovations dating way back, let's call it the wheel, one, because that meant that you could move things around and that freed up so much energy and resources. And then also you can take that concept of the wheel and apply it to like say, a water wheel. And that can generate some level of freedom because now you're letting the water, I don't know, turn something that grinds grain or something.
Right.
And so that's like an extra level of freedom. Then you have electricity, which is kind of that same concept as the water wheel, but, you know, more powerful.
More versatile.
More versatile, absolutely. And then I also think that, you know, this one's also just as obvious, but the internet has been, I don't think that we're even close to fully tapping into the potential of the internet, because like, I think about what it was in the early days, and, you know, it's the open communication.
Cue dial-up sounds.
Yeah.
Trying to sneak onto the computer with your parents, like sleep in, and you're like, shut the fuck up.
Shout out to AOL. But what I think is interesting about the internet is that it's evolved from like being able to just connect you to people to now you have access to Google and pretty much the world's information, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
But then you also now have a medium to start your own business or job with very little resources. And now you can have a multi-million viewer YouTube channel or podcast audience.
Or even something like you've got like Shopify stuff and Amazon, and you can now, with small amount of resources or capital, cool, I know that I have this product, I have my markup, and I can start small and scale it as it continues to grow. That just wasn't a thing without the internet before, because you now have access to a global market instead of, I have an ambition to sell watches, candles, whatever the fuck, but I live in a small town. You're limited to your audience of your small town. You know, prior to that, you'd have to do through like magazine advertising, you know, where you'd put your catalog of all your stuff and you have to send it out. But that requires a fuck ton of capital. You can't just start off, you know?
And it takes up physical space.
Yeah.
Like it takes up a footprint on the paper in the magazine where, you know, they've only got 60 pages that they can put in there or whatever the allotment is. And now the internet, it might be infinite. I really don't know. It sure seems like it's an infinite number of pages that you can have.
Yeah.
And then this might be something that you can talk to. I don't know if you know much about like how the music industry has changed, but when you look at YouTube views, I think it's interesting to listen to songs that were popular in like 2010, and it's like, wow, they had like 13 million views.
Huh.
And now you've got like Gangnam Style hitting, I don't know, did it ever hit 2 billion? I have no idea where it's at, but billions of views. And I don't know if that's been good or bad for recording artists.
I think it's a little both, right? Funny, my buddy Brad, who actually recommended this topic to us, he works in the music industry and is probably like pulling his hair out right now as I try to butcher this because he's got the answers. But I think it's probably both good and bad, right? It's good as far as the level of reach you can have, because now you don't have to fight to get radio slot time and work through the people who own and control that. Now you can kind of be these up and coming artists and prove yourself on things like social media, YouTube, and say, nope, we've done it ourselves. And then that's a different route to get you, you know, a recording contract or something like that. So it's kind of good and bad. It's bad because the revenue's not there like it used to be.
Sure. Well,
Corona aside.
I feel like the revenue potential is still there, but it's harder to hit that revenue because it's not like you make it big and then you get all of that cash. It's more like you make it big and then you still have to be one of the top 10 that's getting 1 billion views.
Whereas before it was easy to, like, people were buying music.
Yeah.
Nobody buys music anymore. We rent it. We pay a subscription service, and based on what we stream, the artists get a little bit of money, but it's so much less, at least in the short term. If you run the distance as a musician or an artist over a long period of time, yes, you're going to consistently get those same streams and make money from that. But musicians historically don't make a lot of money. And so spreading out that payday was hard. And then they switched to, okay, you got to buy merch because that's something we still have and can sell. And then, COVID happened and it's been harder to do that. But
yeah, that impacts your concert sales because I think that's where you get a lot of your revenue as an artist as well. Yeah, that's tough. But it's I like the idea of what the internet's been able to do because it frees you from quote unquote the man.
yeah,
Like you don't have to, if you want to have your own news show like The Hill. I don't know if you've heard of The Hill. It's two people who run their own little news channel now on YouTube.
Cool.
And it's gotten really popular. And it's like, yeah, they're not CNN. They're not Fox. They're not having to have somebody control what does and doesn't get reported. It's like, no, they can actually, they have the autonomy to report on what they want to report on.
it's cool.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right as far as us not fully grasping or tapping the potential of the internet.
Like it's just growing so much.
Yeah. And so it's so much opportunity, but with all of that extra traffic in the space, it's so much harder to go gain a market share of that. So if I want to go start an Instagram page, it takes a lot of work to go be seen. You can't just start and be like, oh, here I am. You know what I mean? Like, it was easier a decade ago because, oh, wow, you've got a website.
Well, everything's decentralized now. It's like you mentioned the magazine
Yeah.
topic. Like, okay, let's use Time magazine as an example. That was, it was like National Geographic, Time. I don't know.
Reader's
whatever.
Digest.
Reader's Digest. There you go. And so like, there are like 20 popular magazines in circulation. And so it's like, well, you just pay for a spot there and sure, it's expensive because it's guaranteed to get to people, but you don't have to fight to rise above all the other noise. Now everything's so decentralized that everybody's competing for a slot and trying to listen in and get their voice heard. And so, yeah, like the privilege is definitely there now that we have the opportunity, but it also forces you to really put in the time and effort to rise to the top.
Yeah, it's almost like there's an equal measure of challenge with the privilege. Whereas before it might have been easier and you just needed to know somebody or have the money or the capital and things kind of stayed as they were. Whereas now in this new environment with the internet, it opens up the door for nobody to become somebody, which I think is kind of neat.
It's beautiful. It's a fantastic opportunity. Tony, one of the comments that you had was around being able to start over multiple times in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you lose your job or if you have to change industries, learn new skills, it's not the end of the world. And maybe some of that's because we've got the social support behind us, like it's almost like a safety net.
Sure.
But then I also think that it's so easy to still come across your literal needs like food and good water, shelter, things like that, that it takes a lot of the risk out of having to start over. Like if I think about the times where if you had to, well, let's use the pioneers that went across the country. Like there was a good chance you died doing that.
Right.
Just to find a new opportunity. Like you're kind of stuck down on the East Coast. You're probably, I don't know what you were doing back then, but
We're looking for gold. Let's go get gold.
dusting stuff off. And now you've got this dream and it's like off you go. And it's like, yeah, you could find gold. You're probably being exploited, but some people actually found it. But you had to go out and really risk your life, and your whole family oftentimes just got left behind.
Or if you bring your family, right? Because how the hell are you going to come back for them? Nope,
Yeah.
I'm going out with my family. And then your kid gets sick. Oh, let me just run on over to the ER, make sure they're... Fuck, I'm in the middle of nowhere and there's no one here to help me. It's just us. And I've spent all my time and mental energy in learning how to be a gold miner so that way when I'm out there and knowing basic survival stuff so I can find food and navigate along the way. I don't know how to be a doctor. I can tell you're sick, but I have no experience on what this might be. Like, shit. so different than our reality right now. And yes, the medical system probably needs some love, and there's some opportunities there, but we still have access to healthcare, even if it does, put you in debt for the rest of your life. But that's different.
But you didn't die.
But you didn't die, exactly. Which again, it's still another form of privilege.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there is a bigger privilege than not dying. Like,
there's that.
Yeah. So it's really a beautiful thing now that like we can take these risks and you can seek new opportunities, better opportunities, without really having a significant impact to your overall outcome of life.
Yeah. Even think about like transportation's one we've kind of touched on, but we've not really hit on. The fact that now I can hop on a plane and within a day be pretty much anywhere in the world. That's fucking wild.
Yeah.
Compared to like the pioneers you just mentioned. Yeah. In 6 months I'll be out to California if I don't die in the process, or you know what? I'm in Tennessee. Let me go back home to Wisconsin to visit family. Yeah, I'll be there in 10 hours. Like, holy shit. Stuff that used to take weeks or months of travel. Now we can go somewhere on a weekend.
I've thought about that as I've been able to go and check out some of the different spots around the world that I've always wanted to see. And like it dawns on me, I still don't really have a true appreciation for it, I don't think. But when I land in, say, like Spain or something, it's like, dude, I was literally on the other side of that ocean right there.
Yep.
7 hours ago. Like on the complete opposite side of the world.
And it's just normal to us because it's what we've always known and grown up with. But when you think not that long ago, this shit wasn't even possible.
I didn't have to worry about packing my oranges so I could fight off the scurvy.
I didn't have to worry about the pirates. No jokes, but like legit someone coming and stealing my shit.
Well, now we've just got those air pirates, like there's some crazy shit that goes on. But yeah, the point's there. It's like the exposure that you get to being able to travel and see everything that you want to see and experience the different cultures. And then I think it's also interesting that we have such a diverse food group. Like, it's wild to think about getting watermelon in the middle of winter. But like you'll go into the grocery store and it's like, there's some watermelon. It's like, I don't know where it's grown, but it's there.
Even the access to different cultures' food. So that's one thing that I've really appreciated that people have taught me how to appreciate since I've moved to Nashville is, I don't know, go get Thai food. Go get, Chinese food, like real Chinese food. Go get Korean food, Indian food. Dude, I love Indian food. I'm so glad that I was introduced to Indian food. All right. Moment in silence for Indian food. It's been a minute. But even that, we couldn't have that if we didn't have transportation available to import those spices and those ingredients from wherever they need to come from. Culturally, food was in the places it was in because that's where the ingredients were grown and harvested. And sometimes some of those ingredients don't grow in other places of the world. Well, shit, you have to import and, with the privilege we have now, access to, all these good trade lanes and stuff open that, man, I can go to a grocery store anywhere and find anything I need or could imagine.
Yeah. While we're talking on food, it also makes me think about like food storage. Because if you look throughout the majority of history, you'd have piles of grain and that would get infested with rodents, or you'd have, let's say you had a successful hunt and it's like, okay, that meat's going to last about 2 days. And it's like, everybody's got to eat right now. And we're not going to be able to keep that unless you had salt, or maybe you're able to smoke it and that makes it last a little bit longer, but there's no freezer.
Yeah.
If you're living in classical Greece or something, like it just wasn't a thing. And so it's really fascinating to think about how fortunate we are to be able to just open up a door in our house and there's a wealth of food that we bought 3 months ago, and it's all right there, still ready to be eaten.
Yep. Next time you go grab one of them toaster strudels,
Yeah, that's right.
remember how privileged you are.
Appreciate that damn icing. That's so good.
Or pizza or whatever, you know, like whatever you're pulling out of your freezer. Fuck.
So, Tony, we've talked a lot about like comparing life today to what life used to be, and
Sure.
learning about what privileges we do have, but I can only think that it comes at some cost. We touched on it a little bit. Like there's a pro and a con to being able to get your name out there on the internet, but you're also competing against everybody else who wants to get their name out. What other costs are there? Like what are we missing out on because of the privileges that we do have?
I think one thing that we're missing out on is with all of this opportunity of all of this stuff, and it can be good stuff too. Like we talked about all these different types of food, and then different types of industries that have all these different types of entertainment, because now I don't have to be spending all my time just to survive. I think we miss out on appreciating the moment because we're too damn busy. That's one that I've rediscovered in this whole pandemic situation, being stuck at home for a while, going, oh, damn, I never stopped. I was constantly running. I was constantly going. I never stopped to appreciate, you know, and one, sort out the thoughts in my own head, but then two, just to appreciate what's around. So I think we get into this and you see it, you know, people call it materialism, right? Where they're constantly just hoarding more and more shit and they need more and more shit. It's because we have the opportunity to taste so many amazing things. And I think that's great. But sometimes in that chaos of opportunity, you lose sight of the things you do have access to and you can appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of what's been on my mind when we kicked off this episode, and I mentioned that it took the pandemic to really start appreciating some of the things that I had. And what I've realized is that life could really be so simple, yet so fulfilling.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to make most people happy, I don't think, at its core. And so, like, I think about this guy who I heard about. His name was Glenn Villeneuve, I think. And I think he was on one of the, like, winter survival TV shows, or I don't know, there are too many of those. But he was on some TV show, and I heard an interview with him, but he was a guy who grew up not wealthy by any means, but like, you know, like a normal life, it seemed like anyway. And he just had this dream that he was going to move out to the middle of BFE, and I don't even know if it's proper to call it homestead, because it was like less than homesteading. He was like, I just need a cabin. And that's just it. So he bought a plot of land in Alaska. And I think about his life, and it's so easy for me to think about it very idealistically.
Yeah.
And it's very like romanticized to me, because it's like, how free is that to be able to live in your small cabin, but you've got, you know, your little fireplace that you cook on. It's a little bit more than just a normal fireplace, but like all he needed was a small cabin. And in fact, a bigger one would have been less important, because that's more space that you have to keep heated.
Sure.
And he's in the middle of Alaska. He's like living off the land entirely. But then he dives into this story about how he didn't plan properly for his first winter. And he was running low on food. And he heard wolves off into the distance, and they had just gotten a kill, and they had killed a caribou. And he had to go literally like fight off a pack of wolves to steal the caribou kill from them so that he could survive.
That's savage.
And yeah, it's savage as fuck. But like the beauty in that, to me, what I find attractive is that there's no 9-to-5 job that you have to worry about. And you're afforded those opportunities where you just stay connected with the world around you. Like, I haven't been hunting or anything like that, but I find it kind of akin to a hike where you're in nature, it's peaceful, you're just paying attention to the beauty that is around you, and you don't have to manufacture beauty like I feel like we're so accustomed to in these like
manufacturing
suburban
beauty.
worlds.
Oof. That's heavy, man.
I don't mean for it to be too heavy, but
No, but it is. Like the fact that we've got such beautiful things all around us and we can't appreciate them, so we manufacture more. So I like to this more, because we can't appreciate the true beauty that's right there. That's deep, dude.
I feel like we have so many distractions
Yeah.
that take you away from that. I don't think that it's intentional necessarily.
No, I don't think so either. It's just the momentum. Oh,
Yeah.
I can have a little bit more. Oh, cool. I liked more. And then you start snowballing, and too much is too much.
Yeah, and so I think that there's something really special about the way Native Americans lived, for example. Not saying that I feel like I could get put into that situation and be like, all right, 3 days in, I'm out.
I was curious because I was going to ask you, like, as you're talking about this guy up in Alaska, if given the opportunity, we've talked a lot about we don't have to worry about that like survival stress anymore.
Yeah, he does. He put himself back into that.
And so my question for you then is, if you were given the opportunity, that's almost what you're like hungry for, is to taste survival stress.
If given the opportunity, would I take it?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I were confident that I could be successful. Yeah. Like if I had, let's say I had like 3 years and I could focus on like learning how to grow my own food, the right way to hunt, and, you know, how to do basic medicine and, you know, like create a splint or something if I broke my leg, I'd give it a shot. But I feel like it's one of those things where, like, you know, maybe like skydiving, where it's like, yeah, you can talk yourself into skydiving, but it's like, now it's your time to jump. It's like, no, I think I'm going to pass, actually.
It's just interesting to me on how I watched the evolution of humanity work its way away from needing to survive, right? And now we're in this space where some of us can thrive, which is, I think, fucking beautiful. But in that, maybe we're thriving wrong, or not really thriving. We have the illusion of thriving because we have so many people. One you mentioned, you're attracted to this, to go, no, let me just go back to surviving.
You know, I guess I've got a few different thoughts here. One of them is that I think human beings need challenge.
I agree.
I think without challenge, we have a lot of mental issues, emotional issues. I don't think we're psychologically evolved enough to handle a life without challenge and things that we have to work on to overcome. And so that's why I think it can be important to stay physically fit and work out.
Yeah.
Things like that. And that's another thing that I think is a privilege that we've almost lost. Like, if you think about what it took to survive in, you know, just 100 or 200 years ago, it took somebody to maintain their physical fitness and their health. And now in today's world, you don't have to do that. In fact, you have to be conscious about trying to maintain that physical health, because it's like, well, everything that I need can be accomplished from literally pressing these keys on the keyboard in front of me. And yeah, my fingers might be the most badass fingers in the world, but like, I'm a pansy compared to somebody 200 years ago.
Well, yeah. And if you think about, like, look at the animals, right? They don't go to the gym. They don't need to, because in their maybe even primitive life, whatever you want to call it, their life has that movement, that muscle building just built into it. And we've gotten to this weird spot where, like, nope, I still need to go to the gym after sitting at the computer all day.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes from our overabundance of resources, food, calories.
Yeah.
Like once you solve the calorie problem, it's game on. Like it's almost like the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you're creative enough to think of, because there's nothing to hold you back. You can burn extra calories to try to stay in shape.
Yeah.
It's like, that's fucking crazy to think about compared to the rest of, animals that are in the food chain.
Right. They're just eating when they're hungry or eating what they need, or, some stuff like bears and stuff that hibernate. They eat in excess, but then they burn through it as they sleep all winter. But their excess is not really excess. We've found a way to have lots of excess. And so you see like obesity like crazy in the world right now, especially in the Western world, because we have access to excess.
Access to excess. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's interesting because like it is such a unique privilege to have all of that, but it does come at a cost. And maybe there's a time where we're technologically and scientifically advanced enough to, well, we've talked about CRISPR before. Maybe you can have gene editing and it allows for people to maintain their health while having all this excess. Or maybe...
Oof, that just sounds so toxic.
Yeah. But does it though? Like, because we're talking about like, this is the cost of the privilege and excess.
Yeah, I guess I just think I'm putting that through the filter of how I feel when I consume excess.
It feels wrong.
And it's not that I feel wrong. Like I feel sick. It's not like morally wrong. It's like, I fucked up.
So if you had like let's say that we were able to boost our metabolisms artificially, and so that meant that you had to consume more, and that's a blessing and a curse because you have to consume more. But that means that if you just live the normal lifestyle that you live today, you don't have to worry about putting on extra fat or having heart conditions and things like that.
Because I can eat whatever I want because I'm 20 for the rest of my life.
Sure, yeah. I don't think of it that way.
That is interesting and semi-attractive.
I think it could be. It might open up a whole nother can of worms that, we haven't considered. But I don't think that we're too far off from being able to do something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's in our lifetime, maybe not. I don't know.
Well, think just how fast shit has gone in the last 100 years. Give it another 100 and yeah.
Now you've added another, I don't know, we were at like 3 billion people in the world in like 1950, I think. And now we're at over 7. We're projected to be at 9 by 2050. Making that number up.
But think about the computing power, right? Before the computing power was just the human brain. And now we've got something that we can offload that to, and then like quantum computing and stuff too. Like you've got something that's an engine that can think and process and do stuff with information in a way that I can't understand or even articulate right now. And you have that as an engine to fuel progress. Man, if we've done so much in the last couple hundred years without an engine like that.
That's like the next electricity, the next internet. I mean, I think the only thing stopping humanity is humanity itself.
That is for damn sure.
Or an asteroid. It's like, well, could be that. But at a certain point, we figure out how to solve that problem.
Yeah, right. We figure out how to have like superhero abilities and just be like, nope, shift it away.
Well, I mean, we're already like talking about, I think it's actually physically possible to like detonate a nuclear weapon on an asteroid and it redirects the course. Because it's like, all you have to do, if you catch it soon enough, it's like you put it off course by like a fraction of a degree, and over the next 2 million miles that it has to travel, that's plenty of distance to get it off track of Earth. Yeah.
Wow. I guess that's such a simple solution for something that seems so, Armageddon in my mind.
Yeah. Well, we also have to catch the asteroid first. So
yeah.
There's that part.
Yeah.
And it's always a little bit scary when I see on the news, it's happened, I think twice in the past few years. And they're like, yeah, we discovered an asteroid. It's going to pass 100,000 miles away from Earth, which is only 4 Earths. Like the circumference of the Earth is like 24,000 miles. And it's like, that's pretty close in the grand scheme of space.
Right. And then how's our gravitational pull?
Yeah.
Are we going to pull it close enough? Hey, Earth, it's time to lose some weight.
Come on, guys, everybody. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there are inherent costs that come with the privileges that we're afforded. We talked about like the competition amongst all the other voices and being able to stay in shape and have the health and being able to appreciate beauty. I think another one that might be along the same vein as appreciating beauty, but it's the environment that we're putting at risk.
What do you mean?
So obviously this comes with its own controversy, and I am not educated enough to dive in and understand all the nuances of like global warming and things like that. But
I'm game. I hate the cold, so let's do it.
let's warm this bitch up. Yeah, I heard that like, you know, we can raise the sea levels, and if that means that I don't have to drive 8 hours to the beach.
Yeah, be closer to 6. Like, let's get it.
Too much. Sorry, Florida.
Don't know if that's the right attitude, but
I'm kidding, obviously.
I know, but I
want people to be displaced.
But I'm with you. Like, oh, the beach could be closer.
Yeah. But yeah, so like obviously, I feel like it's pretty well proven that emitting a lot of pollutants from burning fossil fuels and things like that can have an impact on the overall warmth of the globe. And I don't know what the actual outcome was of the hole in the ozone that was popular a decade or so ago. Last I heard it had actually like closed back up, but it seems like we can have some negative impacts on the world at large.
Sure.
As a result of this. Or if you want to use something that's less controversial, like nuclear power, that has its own controversy in it, but we know that it fucked up some parts of the world.
Right.
Like just definitively, like that part we don't go to anymore.
I find it super cool watching how nature was just like, okay, let me take this back. And like all the green and vines like in Chernobyl and stuff. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm fascinated by these different experiments that have happened, not necessarily voluntarily, but Chernobyl, I think, is a great example of it, where it's like Mother Nature always prevails, like no matter what.
Yeah. Give it enough time, give it some space, and I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just been, what, a couple decades, and all that stuff is covered in green and life and everything again.
Yep. Might be
It's
a
wild.
little funky life, but yeah, I think it's interesting. Would you go back though?
Would I go back to what?
To my answer was going to be like any point in history, but that's so broad. But it's like, do you think that there's a golden age? I guess is a better way of asking the question that's on my mind. Like, is there a time where if you think about the cost that comes with privilege as its own curve on a graph,
Right.
and then the privilege itself as a curve that kind of contradicts that cost curve, do you think that there's a point in the middle that's already happened? Do you think that that point is in the future?
I think that question, because in my mind, I think it through like a story. And it's like trying to say what part in the story is best. And there isn't one. The whole story, the whole journey is what's best, right? And so trying to pinpoint that moment where like, oh, sure, there might be highlights, and every moment along the journey is going to have different opportunities and costs. But I don't think we've hit some place that it was better. Sure, certain things may have been better, right? But as a whole, I don't think we've hit a spot and gone past best. I think best is always evolving and always in front of us because we're constantly learning, growing, evolving, getting new information and perspective to go, oh, this fucked up. Let's maybe not do that. Let's go forward. And so even though there was a dip in experience, maybe would be the way to put it, it was temporary because we actually learned from it and created something even better. So I think that golden moment is constantly the present.
I view it similarly, but slightly different.
Okay.
So I think the way that I think about it, well, first of all, let me preface this by saying it's so hard to answer this question because
Oh, absolutely.
like if I think about the 50s, it's not something that I ever experienced, but it seems like that might be a good time where you might say that's a contender because it's like everybody had automobiles, there was peace in the world, it's after World War II.
It's when the aliens started showing up.
It's when the aliens started showing up, so there's some excitement. And sure, you didn't have the internet, but it's like, no, but you had the family around you and the drive-in movies, and so there was like plenty enough to stay entertained and still appreciate what you had. Like it seems like it was a pretty good balanced point. But obviously, you know, I haven't experienced that, so
Well,
I
of
can't
course,
speak
yeah.
firsthand.
You're just sharing your perspective.
But the way that I think that this question might be better answered would be like a double helix where like there are constant crossing points where it's like this point was a really great point in humanity because we had all the luxuries and all the you didn't have to worry about survival. Like at its core, that's what I think a lot of what we're considering privilege is.
Yeah.
Not having to worry about your food and all your needs are taken care of, and then you also are afforded entertainment. But there are times where we're having less of a severe impact on ourselves and on the world. And I think that time will come again. Like, I think as we're starting to figure out some really unique technologies and maybe even take advantage of the not interstellar, but the solar system around us, which might be in the next few hundred years. But that's going to be a time where, like, yeah, we're probably going to figure out some really powerful things that make life itself so much more valuable and favorable than what it is today. But
That's
perhaps you're fucking up some things in the solar system, and so the problems change.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of what I was getting at about it's always evolving and there's always more or a better moment forward. But you just articulated it so much better.
But it's the key to it is having that drive to solve the problems. Like, yeah,
Right.
we know this is a problem. We know it's a result of whatever it's a result of. And obviously, speaking very hypothetically, but it gives you something to go and fix. And once that's fixed, it's like, well, did it create other problems? If so, let's fix those. If not, then it was a net good, right?
Yeah. There's always something to solve for, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. That picture of double helix crossing and where there's moments of better than or maybe like a peak moment for humanity. And then from there, like, I mean, you watch it in civilizations where they start to grow and they hit this spot where things are good, but then they get too consumed by excess and excess can look any sort of different ways. You know, Rome was so hungry it thought it needed to conquer the whole damn world. It extended its reach and it collapsed from within, you know? You see that repeated. And so I feel like it's that same thing with humanity, right?
Yeah.
That you're talking about is, oh, there's a spot in here where things are just really fucking good. Maybe not be perfect, but for the time that you're in history, things are moving along pretty well. There's not any extreme stressors or threats. Oh, maybe we're relaxing and maybe we can do all these things we don't think sustainably. We don't think more long term. And then we create problems because we think things are going to be good or in that golden moment forever. And then, nope, we've created more problems. Cool. Now they hit a critical mass where we can't ignore those problems. And now that it starts to come back in and go, nope, we need to start dealing with these problems. Then we deal with enough of them and we hit that moment that you're talking about. And that moment could be, you know, weeks, months, years, however long it lasts before it bounces. And I think that's a really beautiful picture of the journey of humanity.
We're cursed by our 75, 80-year lifespan. Like, it almost feels like you don't get the opportunity to really think about anything outside of what you've currently experienced. Like you think about history and you research it, learn about it. But to your point, I think that's how we get trapped in these golden year eras.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also partially because of our Western mindset. You know, with the McDonald's and the internet and all the stuff that we've grown up with makes us expect shit really quick. And it's hard to, when we're expecting and having those expectations be delivered so consistently on a subconscious level, I think that we're being wired to be, it's very difficult to think long term. And long term meaning like real long term, not what's your 5-year plan, man? One culture that I've always loved or been fascinated by was the Chinese culture, because they didn't think in lifetimes, they thought in dynasties. Like, all right, so here's the plan for the dynasty. For the next 1,000 years, here's what we're doing, and here's the plan, and here's how we're going to work it. And you were born into that, and that was just how it was. And nope, I need to bring honor to my family because it's their piece in this great big machine, and we've got a 1,000-year plan to sustain us, to accomplish whatever we're trying to accomplish. But that was just every action you thought of, you thought, how does this impact? And I think that might be an extreme shift away from the present moment. Maybe we need to find balance in there. But that was always fascinating to me because it was so different than a mindset that I'm used to encountering here in the U.S.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there are different variations of that. Like one of the things that came across my mind was like the Tibetan monks.
Yeah.
And it's like they just focus on their, a part of my ignorance, but I want to say it's like religious rituals and whatnot, and like just kind of, you know, mental stability, physical stability. And it's like life is just stable. They maintain exactly what they've got as is and appreciate what they have. That may be way off. I don't know much about Tibetan monks, but that's what it
I'm not
feels
studying
like to
it,
me.
but stereotypically that like checks out.
Yeah.
Tell me about, shifting a little bit, you've got some notes in here about money and how it's different around the world.
Yeah. So my thought was about how we're so much wealthier today than we were any number of years ago, really. I mean, I think this is probably the peak compared to the rest of the world. But my thought there wasn't about money. It was about the ability to focus on the luxuries of life as opposed to the needs of life. But to put, you know, the financial conversation at the forefront here, I thought about how privileged we are as, you know, Americans, and not the most privileged when it comes to, I'm just talking about like financial wealth, and there's obviously value that comes from financial wealth, and
Sure.
It's that freedom and liberty to go and pursue the things that you want to pursue. Because without having that kind of wealth, well, you wouldn't be able to spend all your time focusing on your hobbies and the things that you find most important. But just wanted to kind of like paint a picture here around the world in terms of money, because I think that's the most equitable way to compare wealth.
Sure.
Even if it's not necessarily financial.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Here in the United States, our GDP per capita, so that's gross domestic product, which is how much the country produces in financial value, essentially,
Okay.
from all of its citizens. And then the per capita literally means per head, so meaning per person, right? So the average in the United States is $63,000. That means for every person, it might even be every working person. I'm not sure exactly how it's calculated, but for every person, they're averaging $63,000 a year. Seems like a lot to me.
Yeah. Well, but then you know, of course, there's people on both sides of that spectrum, right? You've got your ultra wealthy that are,
Absolutely,
you know, worth millions, billions, and then you've got your ultra poor that are making, you know, so much less than that 63,000.
And
it's just an average.
And the millions and billions are so far removed from 63,000 that one person can really skew that
Yep.
upwards. Whereas even though there are more people who are making below the poverty line, collectively, they're barely pulling it down because it's still close to that $63,000 mark in comparison to a billionaire, right?
Right.
But anyway, so $63,000 in the United States. Luxembourg, 109,000. Luxembourg is a small little country up around like Belgium and Germany, the Netherlands area.
Well, excuse me. I'm going to go move there and get myself a raise.
You're damn right. Brazil, which is a place that you know what, let me come back to Brazil in just a second. France, 39,000. So there's a pretty considerable difference between the US and France. But when I think about what I see on TV and what I think about French culture, it seems like it's very similar to the United States.
So maybe they just have less ultra wealthy there to skew the number.
Could be. Yeah, that's a good insight. That might be one of the main reasons. I'm not sure. Or my perception of what France is about is off. I've never been there. Brazil, I'll come back here. When I think of Brazil, like I definitely think of favelas and such, but I also think of a country where it's got a pretty robust economy, it's got a large population, and there are some definitely wealthy parts of Brazil, some nice parts of the country. But their GDP per capita is only 64,000. So that's, literally a tenth of what it is here in the US.
6,400.
Yeah, excuse me, 6,400. That's a tenth of what it is here.
Math is hard. It's okay.
We're knocking it out, man. But then, on the low end, Afghanistan, Somalia, $552 a year and $100 a year, respectively. And so it's like, no wonder you hear about the Somali Pirates and the issues that you hear about in Afghanistan. It's like, if you had to survive off of $100 a year, I'm not saying that it's right, but you, as a living organism, you do what you have to do to survive.
Yeah.
And so there's some level of understanding that can be derived from somebody who's, like a Somali pirate and having to take advantage of a major ship coming in here and trying to get some financial security out of it.
Dude, I spent $100 on this mic stand, not including all the other setup that we've got here. And that's for the average person, that's a year of what they live off of.
So
That's wild.
yeah, this just popped into my mind, and I should have thought about this more when I wrote down Somalia $100. But it reminds me, I had just gotten back from a little work trip, and I took a lift from the airport up to my house. And the gentleman that picked me up was reserved, I would say, but it was like a 40-minute ride. And I started to say that I was trying to force him to talk, but it certainly wasn't that. I would just say something like a casual greeting, and it was just a short response. And then, every once in a while we'd have a small conversation here and there.
So on a 10-minute ride, you probably wouldn't have had anything, but because it was so long, conversation sometimes just happens.
It just happens.
Yeah.
So the gentleman that I was riding with had, he was very hesitant to talk about where he was from. It was very clear that he had a thick accent.
Yeah.
And I could just tell that he was from Africa, and I'm curious to learn more about who people are and how they live, because it puts things into perspective. And that's why I think that if anybody has the opportunity to travel and experience a different culture, especially somewhere that you don't know the language, it's go experience some of those, I say hardships loosely because you're traveling for fun or to get an experience out of it. But I think it's important to get those perspectives. And so anyway, I just came out and asked the guy if he was from Somalia. And he was like, yeah, I am. And so that kind of opened it up more, because I think he was surprised that I'm sure most people aren't really thinking about Somalia. And, but I felt bad because it was clear that he felt like he was going to be ridiculed for being from Somalia because of the stigma associated with it. Like we talked about Somali Pirates, and this was a few years ago, maybe when that was a little more.
Well, but still, that's the only thing that's come across my radar for Somalia, right? So you
Yeah.
hear Somalia, you think, oh, Somali Pirates, because that's all we've been exposed to.
Yep. And here's this guy who's, I mean, working your ass off is kind of hard to say when you're driving a car, but like you get it. He's probably working long hours and doing what he can to like scrape by. He was the same age as me. So I think I was like 24 or 25. And he also had a whole family. If I remember right, it was like 8 other people that he was supporting back in Somalia off of his Uber or Lyft salary here in the United States, not to mention himself. And like, damn, dude, that was the single most profound moment that I've had where I realized how privileged I was because, like, you know, as an American, I was making like $63,000 a year, and I've got my own house, and I've got a car that I was spoiled enough to be able to. I had to work hard for it, but like I got the car that I wanted, and and I don't even have one person to support beyond myself. And yeah, it definitely put things in perspective and made me think more about it.
Yeah. It's interesting that, and I'm not trying to make light or say that we don't have struggles here in America, right? Because we do. And, you know, there's different people on all sorts of the spectrum of levels of fortunate, right? But just by being born here, we have such a leg up compared to a lot of other places in the world. And like, you know, there's, you know, the race discussion and back and forth and this and whatever. And I'm like, pause all that. We're all Americans, and therefore, like, we're so blessed and privileged. Not better than, but privileged. And it's not, hey, let's take this and abuse it or, you know, shake it above someone else's head, but just pause for a moment and fucking appreciate that. Like, god damn, holy shit. Especially putting it into context like this. Like, man, I've done the Lyft thing very, very briefly, you know, driving, and it just kind of wasn't my jam, but partially because compared to my corporate job, I was making dirt. It's like, oh, this isn't a fun way to make extra money. Screw this. So thinking that like consistently working through that to actually get enough to have some sort of roof over your head and cover your gas, your car payment, and your food, even if you are trying to do all those things on the super, super cheap scale, and then have enough to go send back to another country to support 8 people. Like, yeah, I'm privileged as fuck.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so we all look at like the billionaires and the millionaires like, oh, they've got the privilege. No, fuck that. Sure, they do. But pause for a moment and look at yourself. Like, you've got the privilege. God. Paradigm shift there for me.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that's not unusual.
Yeah.
And if you just think about the numbers here, like take the averages, it would take 630 years for the average Somalian to make what one American makes in 1 year. Like just taking it by the numbers.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot that we can appreciate. And when I think about it like that, it's like there's a whole lot less that I could just stop complaining about. Or a whole lot more that I could just stop complaining about.
Right. Oh, man. The last episode we recorded, you talked about the restaurant and you tipped them and they didn't give you your shit in your takeout. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't matter.
Yep.
You know, like in context of it, I mean, it does matter, but
I didn't get my plastic fork that I'm going to throw away.
Yeah.
Like, whereas somewhere else, somebody might be like, dude, you got a plastic fork?
Yeah. Yeah. You have extra, you have so much extra, you can throw utensils away. Like, damn.
Something for us all to just think about.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Nick. I don't think there's any coming back or any more conversation after that.
Well, I don't mean to be a showstopper there, but
No, I mean, I think it's a perfect place to end.
I think so too. And I want to give a shout out. It was Brad,
Yeah.
your friend Brad. Appreciate you recommending this episode. I thought this was a fun one to talk about, and I think it's a healthy one to talk about.
I agree.
It's really healthy to just think about it from my perspective, from other people's perspectives, and it forces a lot of introspective evaluation.
Yeah. Well, and I know I think it's a really beautiful perspective, especially where the world's at right now. You know, we've been experiencing this pandemic stuff. We've had the crazy election stress, and we're all like, it's easy to buy into the illusion that we're fucked. But then you go, hold up, let me take just a little bit different perspective. Sure, things maybe aren't as great as they were or that we're used to, but we're still privileged as fuck.
Absolutely.
Catch us next week.